No, I'll be fine with mine. But there are other slides. But I'm fine. I'm self-contained.
Okay. So your slides will make it up there, though, or whatever, right? Like that's all of our
If my computer gets switched to when I start talking.
They told me that all my animations were going to disappear off my slides, but that's okay.
Does someone know that? Like,
if I don't see it, I'm gonna ask for it. Is that all right? It's all connected. Yeah. And tested.
At TED too, right?
So we can't do they have like set up in another room? You just tell them at Davos we could do our own slides.
And at TED.
Yeah. How do the slides advance then, or do we not use slides?
Davos.
Boy.
Davos.
Oh my God, they need voice.
All right, you can start.
Yeah. So many slides. What presentation's gonna be? All people
Ready?
can remember is slide. What was that session about?
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you here. I think this is going to be a pretty unique panel because we have a collection of talented cerebral minds. My name is Ken Rutkowski. I do a radio show on KFWB all around finding rock stars in business and entrepreneurship. We do it every day 2 to 4. And it's amazing on the people that we find. And one of the hottest topics right now is all around crowdfunding. You know, the Kickstarters, the Indiegogos, and how people are just gravitating toward the idea of funding ideas. And it's sparking so many new companies. So this panel, I actually crowdsourced. I asked about 1,600 people for different types of discussions we should have. And this is one that came out of the crowd. They said the idea is, how do you invent the impossible? How do you take something that probably never existed and becomes reality? And so what we did is we collected, this right here is almost like Life of Pi. You know, we have a hacker, we have a futurist, we have an inventor, and we have a magician, right? So it's the beauty of just serendipity of everyone coming together. So what I want to do is, before we dive into this, I wanted to talk about the idea of just the impossible. Next slide. So Raytheon, back in you're going to have to hit click every once in a while. Press click. They created the radar range. This is 1947. Hit click again. 1947. Obviously, it was the microwave. Press $5,000. $5,000. Press spacebar again. It took 50 years for it to become the standard. 50 years for the microwave to be almost everywhere. Next slide. Spacebar. So the Sony, if you remember when this first came out, I'm not sure if anyone remembers. Spacebar. This was in 1982. Spacebar. There we go, 1982. Does anybody remember what it cost? Anybody? $700 is right, spacebar. It was $730. You win something, I have no idea. Spacebar, it took 20 years for this to become a standard. 20 years. So we're starting to see where the markets are colliding. Spacebar. This, if you remember this, I want you to play the video real quick. Check this out. Video?
No video.
No video?
No.
We have no video.
Oh, no, here you go. Here's your video.
Didn't want you to see the next slide. But this is Jeffrey Hahn. Jeffrey Hahn, back in TED in 2006, was showing the touch screen. This is 2006. On July 29th is when Steve Jobs showed off the iPhone. Within 5 years, this became the standard. Touch screen technology has evolved to be everywhere. So what was the impossible? I'm not sure if you remember seeing this. This is crazy when we saw Jeffrey Hahn showing this off at TED. This video was watched over and over again. People were thinking, when is this going to become something that we could have in the home? Now we have it everywhere. Next page. This is the internet right now in 1 minute. In 1 minute, 30 hours of videos uploaded. Looking at 62,000 hours of music listened to in 1 minute on Pandora. And this is growing exponentially. The internet is just, it's rapidly growing so fast that it's becoming hard to even measure. And my last slide is this. Last slide. I'm not sure when you guys saw the movie. It was an amazing movie what we saw, yes. The Jeffrey Hahn technology, but it's really not about the technology in this movie. Does anybody remember the whole premise of the movie?
Precog.
precogs. That's right. Next slide. This is Dr. Philip Lowe. Dr. Philip Lowe and Stephen Hawking has worked together, and they have patented intent. They are able to actually understand the process of the brain intending to do something, and they patent the process. So the impossible, the craziness is happening right now, even with this idea of understanding where intent is. So the whole precog idea may have been far-fetched, but it's not far off. So what I want to do is I wanted to start with our first panelist, and we're going to have a lively discussion after everyone has a short period of time to give a demonstration of what they're working on. Salim Ismail is running probably one of the hottest and coolest places to just learn about everything. Singularity University was started by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis. Their school is at NASA Ames. It's actually at NASA's where the school is. They select the brightest people in the world to go to their institute, and I'm honored to have Salim here. Salim, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. Can I have the next slide? We have an old saying at Singularity that artificial intelligence, or AI, is really easy. AV is really hard. So we don't have a clicker here. What we think about is bringing together the leading thinkers in the world and the fastest moving technologies, add to that the most ambitious and accomplished young leaders in the world, and point them at the biggest problems. Can I see the next slide? So we focus on this idea that technology is growing exponentially. If you went back to the original Apple microcomputer, it's had 40% speed of improvements annually for the last 30, 35 years. If you had had that same pace of increase in, say, the top speed of a car in the car industry, we would today have cars that go 500 times the speed of light.
Wow.
So that gives you a sense of how dramatically computing has changed. It's now driving pretty much everything that we do. We're now embedding it in ourselves, and many of you have seen this. My $1,000 laptop 10 years ago had the equivalent computing power of the brain of an insect. Today it has the equivalent computing power of the brain of a mouse. In 10 years it'll have the equivalent of one human brain of computing power. And in 20 years after that, all 7 billion human brains on the planet, the equivalent computing power will be in the $1,000 laptop. And we think about, what would you do with that? We think technology is hard to predict, but you can actually see exactly how fast your smartphone will be in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Next slide, please. So this graph is interesting. Peter and Ray are the main founders of our organization. Next slide. And we think about how can you harness this accelerating pace of change. We're seeing major industries now. Much of our world is operating on a linear basis. Our regulatory systems, legal systems, educational systems, healthcare systems are all operating off a static base. But much of the world is now driven by information. The stress in the Arab Spring is essentially the younger generation leveraging information in a way that the older generation can't conceive of. And we're turning the world into information. Note that most of your memories aren't in your heads, they're in your smartphones now. And how do we deal with an information-enabled environment, because it goes into this exponential pace of change? Next slide. So these are the studies, the technologies and disciplines. We study the areas of those that are doubling very quickly, and how do we manage these? How does a regulatory framework of any kind keep pace as technology is accelerating away from us, right? Next slide. We bring together the leading thinkers in the world to come and speak, whether it's Vince Cerf or Craig Venter, who sequenced the first human genome. Next slide. And we do a summer program that's 10 weeks long. Next slide. Where we challenge our students, leverage the acceleration inherent in these technologies, and come up with a product or service that will impact 1 billion people within 10 years. Right? You have 3 weeks, off you go. Next slide. Here's one example. This team looked at the rise of robotics, drones, battery technologies, and found that you could use drones to deliver medicine and food to 1 billion people that don't have access to all-season roads. These drones are doubling in their price performance every 9 months. So today, a 2-kilo package can be carried up to about 10 kilometers. By the end of this year, it'll be 4 kilos. By the middle of next year, 8 kilos. And now things get interesting. So we're teaching our students to spot these doubling patterns, harness that capability, and layer solutions on top of that. Next slide, please. This is another one of ours. This is growing meat in a lab, leather and meat, rather than having to hack it off the side of a cow. We have about 70 billion farm animals in the world, and if the middle class goes the way we think it will over the next 2-3 generations, we're going to need 50 billion more farm animals to deal with just that demand in meat. It's a terribly inhumane thing that we're doing to the planet, maybe the biggest crime perpetrated on the planet, is what we've done to the farm animals over the last few decades. And what if we can grow this in a lab rather than having to do it in another way? Now, it tastes terrible at the moment, but the taste is doubling every year, and so we look at those. Next slide, please. So we also do a one-week executive program focused more on the existing leaders, CEOs, investors, government leaders. Next slide. And we think about when will these breakthroughs happen, and what do you do if you're a large company? If you're running a big company and you're not aware of what technologies may come along orthogonally and impact you, you're not doing your job, right? You end up as Kodak or Nokia or BlackBerry, et cetera. Next slide. So we do this circular view of what's happening. We try and build this crucible, and let me spend a minute or two describing a couple of the other ideas that have come out of this. One of our students in Israel is looking at creating an outsourcing platform to solve the Middle East conflict zone, so between Palestinians and Israelis. And his idea is to create an outsourcing platform like Odesk or Elance. People can put projects to get work done. If you want to bid on the project, your team has to be half Israeli, half Palestinian, right? Half Indian, half Pakistani, half Republican, half Democrat. That may be a bit of a stretch. And so by doing this and letting people go build on it, essentially we'll create interdependency and economic prosperity, which is the only thing that's been ever shown to work in a conflict zone. Pretty much everything else is throwing money at the problem. So he's off doing that. Another one of our students is looking at creating nanosatellites that create a mesh system. He wants to launch about 100 of these nanosatellites around the world. And by communicating together and cross-referencing images and video that they take, he will be able to provide real-time video to a 1-meter resolution anywhere on the planet. Think about the frightening aspects and the enormous economic aspects of what that would entail. His first satellite launched 3 days ago. And so this is off to the races and heading off that way. Another one of our companies is looking at the drones, as I mentioned. We've got about 50 of these startups all looking to do these crazy things by leveraging the underlying pace of technology and layering solutions on top of it. And the issue that we have is our current leadership around the world does not think about this. Vinod Khosla did an analysis of mobile phones over the last 10 years. We've seen a doubling in mobile phones every 2 years over the last decade, now to what, 5.5 billion. And he went back to 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, and looked at what did the mobile industry expert analysts say would be the growth of mobile phones at each of those points in time. And in 2002, they said 16%. Gartner, Forrester, McKinsey's, Jupiter, et cetera, predicted 16% year-on-year growth. Then it doubled 2 years later. And in 2004, they said 14%. 2006, it had doubled again, and they said 12%. And in 2008, unable to comprehend that we've had 3 doubling patterns in a row, they said 10%. And then it went up another 100%, right? Now, how much more wrong can you be from 10% to 100%? Right. And you're the mobile industry expert analyst. And governments and large corporations around the world are using these metrics to gauge where the world is going, and yet we have this discontinuous leapfrogging happening all around the world. So for companies or countries or industries around the world, pretty much there's a choice to be made. Either you get on board with these technologies and leverage them because you can leapfrog the status quo in a way that we've never seen before, or you're left behind in the dust. That's kind of where we're going. So with that, thank you for having me.
Salim, so our futurists. Our next speaker is our inventor, who's changed all of your lives, Besides creating Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, either you love or hate, right? Parents. He also has created things like in-car navigation. Leonardo DiCaprio is playing him in a movie all around the idea of Atari. And his new book out called Finding the Next Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, their first job was working for Nolan. Nolan believes the whole area of big change is all around education. And I'm totally with him on that, so let's give it up for Nolan Bushnell.
Woo!
You know, I was on a panel and a lunch, and I asserted that education is going to change massively in the next 3 years. And everybody said, impossible, impossible. And I think that what we're really going to see is an explosive destruction of education of the last 20 years into the future. And the reasons why, think of a block frozen in ice. You hook a spring to it, and you keep pulling on that spring, and you keep pulling on the spring, and pretty soon the block comes loose from the ice. All kinds of crazy things happen when that happens. And what's happened is we've had a building need for better educational outcomes, better efficacy, better use of money, what have you. We are in the middle of a perfect storm. Do I need my slides? Yeah, go ahead.
Next one.
Next slide. I forget about them. I get a little wrapped up. So that's basically the premise. Another slide. This is the thing I was just describing. Next slide.
You're killing us. Wow, that was an electric circuit.
The forces pulling for change. Cheap computers, effective software, public demand. Federal mandates, scarcity of skills. We need all this stuff. Effective software, slightly better, 10x better. We're currently teaching with some of our software kids 10 times faster in a classroom. Now, all of a sudden, I believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, we will be able to teach 100% of the academic subjects that kids learn in high school, 4 years of high school, in 6 months.
Wow.
Now, is that impossible?
Sounds
I don't think so. And so, you know, it's all going to be driven by an increasing amount of learning being done individually and shopping for it on the part of the students. And I think that's going to be really important. You got to understand that our kids' brains are different. Next slide. It turns out that things are different. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Well, it turns out we have kids who are used to a massive infusion of technology. When I was in school, school was the most interesting thing happening. The alternative was watching the corn grow and the river flow. That wasn't very cool, but school was really where it was happening. And my third grade teacher let me teach the thing on science, on electricity. And I can tell you that I didn't know anything about electricity when she let me do that. And I taught the class, and I thought it was magical. And I went home and set up the card table in the corner of my bedroom, got every battery and light and piece of string and wire that I could find, and I started tinkering, and I've never stopped. This is the thing that I think if we can get our focus onto really powerful things and learn faster, we can keep the enthusiasm alive and make it really fun. Next slide. Perfect storm, I already did that. Next storm. The other part that is really a problem is we're training out creativity. And it turns out that the next big wave of issues is going to be more about creativity than academics. I mean, I struggled and I learned how to do partial differential equations. I've never done it since, and the internet will do it for me very quickly. But what happens is that creativity is where the next big area, solving problems, fixing things in unique ways, that's where the magic is. And when you see Maker Faire and some of the other things that are starting to really capture this project-based learning, this is where it all happens. Next slide. We have another thing with our software that I really am excited about. We can measure how long it takes someone to learn something. Now think about it. How long did it take you to learn that? Well, then the interesting question is, what did you eat for breakfast? Which makes you learn faster? High carb, high protein. Your brain uses a massive amount of sugar, but maybe it's dependent. The thing that's interesting is that there's a suggestion for the 10 o'clock snack, that it should be a sardine, black chocolate or dark chocolate and green tea. And I like to say, maybe so, but not altogether. But anyway, we're going to be doing some testing, and we will tell you definitively what you should have for breakfast, what you should have for lunch, how much exercise you should get, how much sleep you should get, whether you should have math in the morning or math in the afternoon. If you can't put a number on it, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to have numbers on this, and I think it's going to be really interesting. Next slide. Next slide. These are the things we're doing. And I think it's going to really change the way we do things. It may be that everybody's a little bit different, but at least if we characterize you, we're going to be able to teach you faster, fine-tune you as a intellectual athlete.
Got it? Thank you, Nolan. Futurist, inventor, hacker. And the idea of the hacker is don't think computer hacker, think about the whole idea of hacking life. Pablos works for Intellectual Ventures, Nathan Merville's company up in Seattle, and their job is to create as much as they can and then lock it up for 20 years. Pablos' his job is literally to look outside the box and find opportunity. And he does hack from computers to life. Matter of fact, one of his current projects is hacking healthcare, but really taking it and bending it what Pablos does. He's one of those unique people who goes by one name, and it is Pablos. Pablos.
Thank you. So any other hackers here? No? What kind of conference is this again? Next slide. Anyone can just yell next slide whenever you want. So I work in this lab where we're trying to test out our inventions and see if they're going to work or prove that they're not going to work. We basically just bought one of every tool in the world, hired one of every kind of scientist, and we tried to take on some of the big problems that humans have. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of competition since most people are busy making fart apps for the iPhone. So our business, though, is to make markets for invention. We want to make it practical to invest in inventors, support them so they can keep doing it, so we can scale all this up and do more of it. So next slide. So I'm going to talk about 3 problems today in 6 minutes. This is what we call a cubic mile of oil. So if you made a cube a mile on a side and a mile deep, that's how much energy we use to power the planet in about 2000. It's a lot of energy. Next slide. Right now, we're at about 3.5 cubic miles of oil. That much energy is what we require to run this planet right now. Next one. If we keep going the way we're going and try and do a really good job of it and not expand our energy use too much, we need another 1.5 cubic miles of oil. And if we do a really, really good job and we do everything we can imagine for reducing our needs and all that, it's 1.4 instead of 1.8 additional cubic miles of oil to power this planet, right? Next slide. By 2050, when we start running out of oil again, we need another 5 cubic miles of oil on top of everything I just showed you, right? So we need a lot of energy for this planet. We're running this grand experiment every day. More people, no more planets, right? This is all unprecedented for humans, and what we did before isn't going to work. So we have to invent our way out of this. And to do that, we've got to scale up invention. So next slide. Alternative energies, which we're all very enthusiastic about, can help us with that. Those are included in the calculations, by the way. But let's just imagine alternative energies, like windmills. Windmills are fantastic. They make energy out of wind. It seems like it's free. Next slide. So if we put windmills over all of those states, in everybody's backyard, and on the sidewalks, we get 1 extra cubic mile of oil worth of energy, right? And I showed you how many we need. So what are we going to do? Put windmills in Beverly Hills? So these schemes don't provide what we call base load, which is lights on when the sun's down, when there's no wind blowing. So we need a miracle in what we call energy storage to keep that energy around until we need it when the wind's not blowing. Well, we don't have that miracle yet. So next slide. So we decided to work on nuclear. because we saw a way to provide baseload energy that scales. Not only that, it's greenest possible energy, right? Nuclear doesn't do any carbon emissions. But the way we do it these days is you dig up uranium out of the ground, you put it through this complicated enrichment program with centrifuges and stuff to turn that stuff into a fissionable material that you can use to put in today's reactors. And when we do that entire process end to end, it's 0.7% efficient. That's how much energy we get out of nuclear. It's still a lot. The other 99.3%, we put in stockpiles. We store that shit on the ground, on the face of the earth, perpetually. We have no idea what to do with it. We just store it. So, next slide. We invented a new type of nuclear reactor, powered by nuclear waste. We take that junk, we put it in our reactor, it gets enriched inside the reactor and burned inside the reactor. This is a way to make nuclear scale. It's safe, it scales, we get all the energy out of the fuel. There's no proliferation risk because you can shut down those fuel enrichment programs, right? Next slide. This is a stockpile I'm talking about in Kentucky. 700,000 metric tons of nuclear waste, radioactive uranium waste. In our reactors, we can use that to power the entire planet, including growth, for a few hundred years. Now, this is just one idea. It turns out not a lot of people are working on nuclear energy. We think a lot more people should, and you should think that a lot more people should. We need some competition in this. So, next slide. Next thing I want to show you. These guys, you remember these guys from a while back? We're the big 99%. Well, it turns out, next slide, those 99% from America are the top 14% globally, right? You can be the bottom of the food chain in America, and you're at the top of the food chain in the world. So we think it's important to go and invent for those people, for the world. What are the world's problems? Not just the problems that rich people have. And most of my problems are pretty much taken care of. I can nitpick, but nobody wants to listen to me bitch about my problems. So let's go after some big problems. Next slide. Next slide. Here's an example. This woman is loading vaccines into a $2 styrofoam cooler to trek them across the Sahara to some remote part of Africa. Next slide. We inject kids. 20% minimum fail in the field, right? Because they didn't stay cold enough long enough. We're not preserving the cold chain. $2 styrofoam cooler with $25,000 worth of vaccines doesn't pan out. Next slide. So we looked at this from a fundamental perspective and figured out we could invent a device. This is a kind of a super thermos. You put vaccines in there. You stick it in the sunshine, in the Sahara, with no external power. Come back 6 months later, and your vaccines will still be cold. This thing gets you 6 months. Styrofoam cooler is good for about 4 hours. And that's a way to solve that problem. It's about 200,000 lives a year lost right now just to bad vaccinations, right? And the way vaccines work, we got to get a lot closer to like 99% before it really solves the problem. Next slide. This is what the thing looks like. We're fielding these things in Senegal right now. Next slide. Last problem I want to show you. These guys are these domes you see on boats. Those things are satellite dishes. There's a physically steerable dish in there that we use to talk to satellites. That's how you get internet to a boat. Next slide. This is a Predator drone. In the front, the reason it has that bullfrog shape is there's a physically steerable dish in there because that's how we can aim a satellite at aim a dish at a satellite to communicate. So kids in Nevada can control that drone with a joystick, right? So the problem with this is it's a great way to get internet. Those things are big and heavy and expensive, and they don't scale. That's why you don't have fast internet on planes. But it's also why you don't have fast internet everywhere in the world. Our new satellite networks have orders of magnitude more capacity than anything we did previously, right? The entire single satellite these days has more capacity than the entire network that's been deployed before. So we can get wireless to everyone on the planet, but we don't have a way of practically aiming a beam at those satellites. So next slide. So this is a little bit about how antennas work. These are antennas. You might think it looks like a pipe organ, these are antennas not in RF, but in audio ranges, right? And we have a different one for every note. Next slide. But a few years back, somebody invented this thing, a synthesizer. What does a synthesizer do? It blew away those guys with pipe organs, right? And what it does is computationally, it synthesizes a note using solid-state electronics. Next slide. So we started investigating this new area in science. Whoa.
All right, wait.
Called metamaterials. So these are materials that don't exist in nature, but that we can make with cool properties, in this case, a tunable dielectric. So we designed a new type of antenna. This thing is a flat panel that can electronically steer a beam. And it can track to aim at a satellite. You can stick it on the roof of a car or a plane. You can slap it on the side of a building, and it'll find a satellite and get you internet. We can get gigabit wireless to everyone on the planet this way. Have you noticed how your cell phones at this conference are all shit, no signal, right? That's because the way we scale cell infrastructure, everybody has an omnidirectional antenna, and it's broadcasting noise in every direction, and you hope some of it lands on a tower. And that mostly works until you get too many people in one place. With this, I can aim a separate beam at each user and reuse that spectrum. So that's all I had to show today.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
Pablos. Marco Tempest. Marco Tempest is a cyber illusionist. I met Marco about 10 years ago. Marco takes literally the impossible and turns it into a story. He currently has spoken at Davos, the World Economic Forum. He has some of the most popular videos on the TED Talk page. And Marco, he's truly one of the most unique, most original thought leaders on the planet. And Marco was the one who actually created the whole topic of the panel as we crowdsourced it. And I'm honored to have Marco Tempest join us. Marco.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming along. I'm a cyber illusionist, which means I combine magic and science to create illusions. Think of it as magic for the 21st century. Now, what I'd like to talk about today for a moment is magic as a sandbox for prototyping future technologies. Magic is an excellent way to experience things which are technologically not quite possible. So I see myself somewhat as an inventor, but I'm not limited by available technologies. In fact, the aim in magic is to do things that are technologically not possible, to think a little further and try to give us a feel of how a near future technology might be experienced. I brought with me a little demo to show you what I mean. It's a topical piece. You probably all heard of Google's Project Glass. It's new technology. You look through them, and the world you see is augmented with data. Names of places, monuments, buildings, maybe one day even the names of the people that pass us on the street. So these are my illusion glasses. It's not Google Glass. So a big shout out to Google for not letting me in the developer program. Anyway, they're designed to give you a glimpse into the mind of a cyber illusionist. And let me show you what I mean with a card trick. So we're going to start out by taking a card. Any card will do. And let's put something significant on the card. And let's lose the card somewhere in the deck, just like this. OK. Now, let's start up the system. For those of you who don't play cards,
acquiring image.
A deck of cards is made up of 4 different suits. There's hearts, clubs, diamonds, and spades. Cards are amongst the oldest of symbols and have been interpreted in many different ways. Now, some say that the 4 suits represent the 4 seasons. There is spring, summer, fall, and winter.
My favorite season is winter.
Mine too. Like magic, winter involves visual wonder, drastic change, and a delicate balance between its physical states. Now, in each of the 4 suits, there is a total of 13
Each
cards.
card represents a phase of the 13 lunar cycles.
So over here is low tide, and then over here is high tide, and then of course in the middle is the moon.
The moon is one of the most potent symbols of magic.
Now there are two colors in a deck of cards. There's the color red and the color black, representing the constant change from day to night.
Marco, I did not know you could do that.
Thank you. Well, in a complete deck of cards, there are 52 cards representing the 52 weeks of the year.
If you total all the spots on a deck of cards, the result is 365.
365, that's the number of days between each of our birthdays. Make a wish. As a matter of fact, it was on my 6th birthday that I received my
Don't
first
tell
deck of
or
cards.
it won't come true.
Oh, yeah. Well, and ever since that day, I traveled around the world entertaining boys and girls, men and women, husbands and wives, even kings and queens.
And who are these?
Mischief makers, watch. Hey, wake up.
Whoa!
Are you ready?
Ready.
Let me see what you got.
Presenting my pogo stick.
Oh, be careful.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
But today, of course, I'm performing for a different kind of audience. Today, I'm performing for you.
Sign card detected.
Now, sometimes people ask me, hey Marco, to do this kind of work, do you just work from 9 till 5? Of course not. Magic is a 24/7 job. I don't literally mean 24 hours, 7 days a week. 24/7 would be a little bit of an exaggeration. But it does take practice. Now, some people will say, well, magic, that must be the work of some evil, supernatural force. Well, to this, I just say no. Okay, in German it's 9-9. Magic isn't really that intense. I have to warn you though, if you ever play with somebody who plays cards like this, don't play for money.
Why not? That's a very good hand. The odds of getting it are 4,165 to 1.
Yeah, okay, but my hand is better. I guess we beat the odds.
I think you got your birthday wish.
And that leaves me with the last and most important card of all. And unlike anything else you've just seen, virtual or not, this is without a question
Sign card
the
detected.
real thing. All right, bye-bye. Thank you.
Again, it's a very dynamic panel, and the whole idea of imagining the impossible without limitations from Marco's side, with the brain power, of course, of what Salim and Pablos are doing, and then with, of course, the expertise and just bringing all these dynamic people together like Nolan's done. I really want to dive in the whole idea. First is, when we say the word impossible, I want to go with Salim first. Salim, talk about the process that you guys go through at Singularity to select the students to come into the university. It's a very unique process, and you use governments to get actively involved.
So every summer we have 80 students that come from 35 or 40 different countries. Average age is 30. Most of them have a graduate degree because we're throwing a ton of information at them, and we want them to have some academic discipline and rigor in absorbing all of this information. We have about half the student having a deep technology expertise. There's some medical doctors, a few nanotech gurus, a few AI experts, etc. The other half of the students are investors, entrepreneurs, policy thinkers, artists, the softer side of things, right? If you had 80 robotics experts for the summer, you're not going to come up with a good outcome. nothing wrong with robotics. You just don't have the diversity of thinking. We want at least 40% female to male ratio, which far exceeds the actual applicant ratio. And that diversity of thinking is the crucible that brings all of these expertises together. And it turns out when you bring people with different backgrounds together and give them an impossible challenge, go impact 1 billion people, they have to get rid of all of the frameworks that guided them up to that point. And they have to come up with entirely new frameworks in their thinking. And we're hoping to have them do that. And so if they fail and don't impact 1 billion people and impact 100 million people, that's okay, right? But they're going to go back to their home countries stripped of their conventional thinking, and now they're really thinking at scale. And then we're trying to pick the people who will be running those countries in the next 10 or 20 years with or without us. So it's been pretty successful so far. We have now about 1,300 alumni in 85 different countries. And our view is if we're trying to impact global problems, we can't be sitting in one place hoping to do it. We have to have people all over the world that have this type of thinking. They're seeding that type of thinking and approach across the rest of the world.
So Nolan, this is a great idea. Why can't we take this concept and somehow bring it to the public as opposed to a very closed, expensive school, make it more open up to schools around the planet?
I actually think we can, and in some ways should. Of course, when you have a group of hyper-selected people, you're going to get extraordinary results that may not be duplicable elsewhere. But I've also seen how that can surprise you. You'd be surprised how really weird people come up with some great stuff. I mean,
like yourself.
Well, I was thinking, I hired Steve Jobs, and he came up with a lot of great stuff. He was convinced that he could do better than I was, so it was okay.
You do think the public schools can have a transformational change? Because I'm assuming the idea of the impossible, because you said, a lot of people say it's impossible to change it. You said within the 3 to 5 years, you actually see a big change. What's going to make that change happen?
The real thing that will force the happening is that when you have an extremely disruptive change in the private schools, in the online schools, and that the public schools they cannot resist it anymore.
Got it.
When you have 20% difference, everybody says, oh yeah, it's a statistical error in that. When you maybe double it, they say, oh yeah, well, maybe in some cases. When you got 10 times over and over and over again, it's irresistible.
It has to happen.
It breaks the block loose.
Let me go to Pablos. Pablos, in your laboratory, you literally do the impossible. There's one of the projects that you're working on where you're finding a way to bring the force of a hurricane down.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an amazing concept. Of course, we've seen all the devastation from the hurricanes that have hit our country.
Sure.
Give us an idea of just even that concept and how it would be something like a hurricane, which is monstrous in size. How do you think so big?
Well, we cheat. One of the ways is that we internalize Moore's law, which he described earlier. We understand those exponential curves and we applied them. We cheat by having all those tools around so we can do things on demand. We cheat by inventing on a 5 or 10-year horizon, right? All you guys have to ship a product. I don't, right? So you're good at inventing a faster, cheaper version of what you did last year. I'm inventing the next generation of technologies, and I just don't have a lot of confidence.
Explain the hurricane.
So hurricanes are fueled by heat irradiating off the surface of the ocean, right? So we thought, hey, what if you just cool off the surface of the ocean? Which everyone laughed at us because it's really big. But what we realized is there's a free source of energy everywhere you have this problem, waves. Normally we don't care about wave energy because it's not where we need the energy and it's not in a form we need. And by the time you solve that, it's very expensive. So our invention is simple. It's a giant tube. You stick it in the ocean, waves push the hot water in the top, and what do you know? It pumps it down and mixes up with the cold water below. So you do that, and all you got to do is bring that temperature down 1 or 2 degrees on the surface, and it keeps your Cat 4s down to Cat 3s, or Cat 5s down to Cat 4s or Cat 3s. So this is a big project. It'd be expensive to do, but the device is made of recycled tires. So it costs a lot less than the damage from a hurricane.
That makes sense. Marco, everyone's used the term Moore's Law. You don't like that term. You think it's overly abused, don't you?
Well, we've heard it for for quite a while. But if I may something about like creativity maybe and innovating, I totally want to jump on what Salim was saying. Like my process is very collaborative. It's like a lot of camaraderie. I have to attract different talents with different skill sets, different backgrounds. Most importantly, people who don't think the same way I do. And what I identified as a process in my tiny little lab is that it really makes a lot of sense sometimes to build something before you think about it too much. Like tinkering is something amazing, works really well. It's fantastic for learning. Working together in groups is really great. And one other thing, which is very counterintuitive for a magician, is openness and inclusiveness. So magic typically is very secretive. Magicians don't like to share their secrets with the wider world. The way I work is I actually reach out into the open source community and bring in talent and incredible builders from that community. And the IP which we come up with, we share that back into the community. So we try to extract useful pieces of something like you just seen, which might be useful for educators to have some sort of PowerPoint on steroids to engage their students or other artists, and bring out these little pieces of code which might be reusable and would start off people further on in the process. So, yeah.
Salim, I want to go with the whole idea of crowdfunding because this has become the hot topic. You know, of course, we have the Jobs Act that's been finally approved, and we're going to see people actually take equity in some of these different programs. How do you think crowdfunding is going to allow this whole idea of imagining the impossible make things happen even faster? Because it's not going to be under a corporate shell. It's the community is going to endorse something.
I think it's the most interesting thing that's going to happen in finance in 50 years. And the reason I say that is it used to be that a VC sitting in an office decides whether your idea is fundable or not, and they're taking a crapshoot. They're funding 10 companies knowing that 9 are going to fail,
right,
and they're looking for the one, right? And that's their ratio at best, which is it's basically a numbers game. When you can have that many more companies being funded or that many more ideas being funded by the crowd, it becomes really fascinating. And I'll use the example of the Pebble watch. Eric Mijakowski tried to get a runner's watch built. He went to 20 investors trying to raise 100 grand around Silicon Valley. They all said no. He put it up on Kickstarter. He had 5 weeks of cash left. In 3 weeks, he'd raised $3 million. And by the end of his campaign, he'd raised $10 million. His original attempt was $100,000.
With no equity taken out.
With no equity. You're pre-buying the product. Now, two things happen when you see that. One is you realize all the investors are completely wrong, right? The second is, if you can do that, why do you need the investors? And if I wanted to build a company or invest in a company, I'd ask you, hey, come up with a great idea. And I would say to you, well, have you put it up on Kickstarter? And if you've gotten successful on Kickstarter, then you don't need me. So when we think about investments, we're always looking at team, market, and technology risks. Technology risk is down to almost nothing because for about $100,000 you can build a company. It's a tenth of what you needed 5 years ago and a hundredth of what you needed 10 years ago. Market risk has now been wiped out by Kickstarter and Indiegogo because if you can put something out there, you generate and validate market demand, and then it only comes down to team and execution risk. Now, what that means is the holy grail of the unique selling proposition of Silicon Valley has just been wiped out. That environment is now democratized to the entire world, and we're going to see incredible things happen all over the world within the next 3 to 5 years. And we're very, very excited about that.
Nolan, are teachers broken? Is that what's preventing us from moving forward also?
No, the system is. I mean, teaching is the hardest job in the world. You have to be a judge, a disciplinarian, an an entertainer. You know, you need to be a judge. You need to, be a clerk with all kinds of stuff. You know, being a good mentor is only one of the small skills. And I believe one of the things we need to do is really make teachers' jobs so much easier. And I think we can do that through the software and some of the things we're doing. I think that the ability of a teacher to inspire and to encourage and to solve unique problems. What we really want is one-to-one education. You can look at every statistic, and any person who has a personal mentor, one-on-one, outperforms every other thing. And so by having part of the class doing software and working on projects, things like that, you free up time so the teacher can spend that one-on-one time that's so valuable.
Pablos, you get to watch all of these different types of intellectual projects, intellectual property coming into your lab. Is there a hot spot right now that you guys are all gravitating towards that you're excited about?
Well, the one for us that I try to describe is metamaterials. I mean, we're the epicenter of metamaterials research on planet Earth right now because it's hot and ripe, and we're going to do, collision detection with it. We're going to do all kinds of different things with that capability. So we're into that. I work on 3D printing technologies, inventing new 3D printing technologies. To me, I think you guys have probably already learned a little bit about that. And then, look, again, it's about computation. We are getting so many new types of sensors. We're hooking those up to computers so we can analyze their data. We're putting that on the network. And the effects of it are staggering. We're just getting started understanding what's going to be possible with this stuff.
Marco is also at the MIT Media Lab, so he's one of the fellows up there, and you get to have a laboratory also, right? And they take a very entrepreneurial approach there too, right? The lab allows you to take projects in there, work on projects, and spin them out and turn them into something. Are you seeing a lot of labs like that, or is that one of those unique situations?
I think I just started my fellowship there, so I'm not a total expert, but what I can see is that the Media Lab is a very unique place in that the way the IP is handled, that the stuff which is actually created there, that students can go out and make companies with what they do, and the sponsors or members have access to that IP, so there's very little of it's almost like a communal IP which is shared by everybody, which is great. I think it's really important in whatever you do if you want to attract talents to help you create impossible, amazing things that they really have a stake in. And I think like sharing the IP or giving them a way to actually benefit from what they're doing is a very good way to attract talent.
Pablos uses the word "we get to cheat." I know, I love that word. We get to cheat, right? And it's okay.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you do the same thing. You're able to cheat also.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do in my work is really kind of going a little bit further than what's currently possible with technology. So I take things like gestural recognition or projection or artificial intelligence or robotics and see what that might do in the future. It's like, do we really want to wear a device like that, or is that like super creepy? And how would that be to tell a story with it? How would it be if we could interact with drawings and could draw on every surface and have them become alive? So these are kind of experimentation scenarios, little stories to musings on a possible future. And of course I have to cheat because some of this technology is not really yet available. Right. However, what you've seen today was not pre-recorded.
No, that was all live. Last question for Salim. Salim, we hear a lot of the people that have been very successful on this planet said there's something bigger out there, privatization, commercialization of space. From Bezos to Branson to Musk, they're saying that's the next big generation, or the next big exploration opportunity. How do you guys see space, and how will it affect us when it comes to imagining what's next?
I think it's a great inspirational medium in all of our science fiction and all that operates. The fundamental reality is we're not going to get there anytime soon. The reason is that we're bags of carbon and water, and it just doesn't transport that well up into space, where any one little thing that happens is an existential threat for everybody there. I think what we will do is send robots. I think we've got a project that we're looking at that's looking at bioengineering Mars, sending across bacterial seeds that will create a new environment, turn the rust into terraform the whole planet. And I think we'll start doing those types of things, but I think we're a long way away from getting off the planet in the way that we think that's envisioned in science fiction. The good news is that inspiration creates a pull factor in all of these other technologies and allows us to go and build these things, right? And I think Nolan touched on it in a way. What's happening with education is we're moving from a push environment to a pull environment where people can, in the same way with facts, we don't teach them anymore. You can pull them down as you need to from Google or Wikipedia. We're turning learning into the same object, which allows the teacher to become the mentor and so on. I think we're going to see that across the board. We'll use science fiction, we'll use space technologies, we'll leverage lower Earth orbit very effectively in the next generation or two. Then we'll be ready to go to the next level. But we're a little bit away from just immediately going off to Mars in 3 years or 5 years or whatever.
Pablos, Nolan, Salim, and Marco Tempest, thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.